So you're being evicted because your landlord's moving in. Now what? After 10 years of living in her Junction Triangle home, Jennifer Allen received an eviction notice, or rather, an eviction email. Devastated, she turned to her local community Facebook group for help. "Me, my husband and 5-year-old son have been evicted," Allen wrote in a closed group on Tuesday last week. "My son goes to Perth Early Learning Centre and uprooting him plus finding new daycare is daunting and I really want to stay in the neighborhood. Does anyone have a rental unit coming up or leads?" Allen has been renting in Toronto since she moved to the city in 2004. Her family currently occupies the main floor and basement unit of a house in the West End. "The plan was to rent long-term," she told Toronto Stories in an email interview. "Home ownership is out my range. Without 6-figure jobs from 2 people and/or family help, real estate is impossible." Allen said her landlord didn't give any indication that she had plans to move into the property until recently. "Up to that, it seemed good to go for the long term," she said. This type of eviction is known as an N12, where a landlord wants to end a tenancy because they require it for personal use. Legally, landlords have every right to do this if either they, a family member, or a purchaser are moving in. In September 2017, however, new eviction rules were introduced to protect tenants in these cases. On top of giving at least 60 days notice, landlords serving an N12 eviction are required to give either 1 month's rent as compensation or offer their tenants another rental unit. Landlords must also intend to stay in the unit for a minimum of 1 year. If they re-rent, demolish, or convert the unit within that time frame, they could be fined up to $25,000. So, does an email count as written notice for an eviction? Of course, being evicted by your landlord isn't as simple as receiving a notice via email. There's a full process, which is why some people on Facebook questioned the lawfulness of Allen's eviction. Step 1 is giving tenants written notice, and an email doesn't count, says Ontario landlord and tenant lawyer Kari Masad. That's because when a landlord completes a certificate of service, which is required when submitting an eviction notice, they have to indicate who they gave the notice to and how they delivered it. Email isn't one of the options on the form, Sad noted. So unless the tenant has already agreed to receive notices by email, the preferred way would be to use one of the prescribed methods, handing it to them in person, leaving it in their mailbox, sliding it under the door. Email is kind of a secondary basis. Allen hadn't received the proper forms from her landlord when she initially took to Facebook about her eviction. But later that day, her landlord came by to drop off the legal forms, she said. What tenants can do after receiving an N12 eviction just because Allen and her family are being evicted, doesn't mean there isn't anything they can do about it. SAD suggests tenants try talking to their landlords about the situation first, as it may be a more straightforward and less frustrating process than going to court. Anytime any tenant receives any sort of notice, it's not automatic, the lawyer explained. There are some exceptions to that, but 90% of the time you receive the notice, and then you wait for what's called notice of hearing. Usually, a hearing will be scheduled if the landlord and tenants do not come to an agreement, and the landlord files an application with the Ontario Landlord and Tenant Board. At the hearing, tenants can either try to disprove the landlord's claim that they or a family member are moving into the unit or argue why they should have longer than 60 days to move out. It may be valuable to have a hearing, if only for the purpose of extending, if there's no evidence where the board can reject, Sad said. It does happen that the board rejects an N12, so if a tenant does have reason to believe that it's not in good faith, it's not a hopeless application. Finally, both landlords and tenants should ensure they have all the correct forms filled out for their specific eviction as required by the Residential Tenancies Act. Any missed step could mean that the process has to start over again, Sad warned, so I would encourage landlords and tenants to be very vigilant in examining the forms and seeing what's there.